2008, the WHO has released some indicators of complementary feeding practices for children that were breastfed as well as for children that are not breastfed. So we have 5 indicators that measure different dimensions of complementary feeding practices. And they cover things like the dietary diversity of the diet, the number of meals that children should consume, and they also cover aspects related to when solid foods are introduced in the child's diet. So the indicators, we realized, were very much needed because they have been instantly used. As soon as they were released, they were incorporated in large data collection exercises, the demographic and health surveys that collect data regularly in a large number of countries have picked them up and are measuring complementary feeding practices. So the advantage is that we now have a wealth of data from up to 50 countries at every round of those surveys that give us some information about the quality of complementary feeding. And we find that actually complementary feeding practices are very poor everywhere in the developing world, especially so in Africa and South Asia, where there's less than 30% of children, for example, who have adequate practices, who are fed adequately. The situation is better in Latin America, where the population are wealthier and more educated. So this is one of the use of the indicators. Another use has been for evaluation of programs. It has been really useful to know that programs that aim at improving complementary feeding practices actually have an impact on those practices. With the indicators now, we have this standard set is used to document programs, and everybody uses the same one, and we can see by how much you can improve infant and young child feeding practices with different types of interventions. So it's been very useful to have them, and they have been used extensively. They've even been used in research where we didn't think there would be such an uptake. So things are looking really good in terms of the usefulness and the use of the indicators. Yeah, the problem with complementary feeding practices is that they encompass a large number of practices, and the indicators cover only 4 different areas of those practices. There are things that are not amenable to being measured in large surveys by proxy indicators. For example, an important component of feeding practices is that the mother and the child interact. The interaction between the two of them, we often say we want mother to have a responsive feeding type of feeding practice, and it is not something you can measure by recall, by asking the mother, do you use responsive feeding? And so that would need to be done by observation, and so we don't have indicators of this dimension, for example. We also don't have indicators related to the appropriate texture of the food, or even food hygiene, which is really important. Hygiene and preparation of complementary food is really important in developing countries, and it's hard to get this information by recall. So we're still missing some dimensions of complementary feeding that we would like to have more information on. And we also don't get information on quantity consumed, which is basic, very important. We use only those proxy because they're simple and practical to use, but we're missing still a few important dimensions. Yes, I'm strongly recommending that we sit back and think and revisit those indicators. They've been useful. They have helped us put complementary feeding on the map, and including for donors, they have been important to raise the issue that complementary feeding practices are basically very poor, and we need to do something about it, and we need to invest in improving them. But now is the time to find ways to measure them even better and develop new indicators, including some that would quantitatively measure what the children consume. And there's more technology now that we can use to do that. And so it's an area that I hope we will all reflect more on